Thanks for joining. Once again, let's delve into some diet dogmas. And remember, the complete book will be coming out soon with much more details than we have here. So we start talking about diet dogmas. We're really talking about is a bunch of dietary practices that lead to inclusion and exclusion, very similar to what we see with religions as relates to dogmas and tenets. A lot of these dogmas and tenets lead to a lot of the fad diets that we might think about when we think about dietary practices. One such dietary practice that we could think about is the raw food diet. But a lot of people think that raw food diet is just being vegetarian or just being vegan. Is that true? Well, let's talk about that.
Warning. The following presentation contains information that might contradict what you have previously heard, or believed to be true, about how the human body works, and contains material that is not suitable for closed-minded individuals. Enjoy!
So when we think about raw food diet, what is in a raw food diet? Once again, a lot of people think it's simply being vegetarian or simply being vegan. But what it really is eating foods that do not get cooked above 114 degrees Fahrenheit and do not have any processed materials within it. So what we're really looking at is foods that are not cooked, not processed, do not contain refined oils, do not contain refined sugars or flours or grains, or get cooked above 114 degrees Fahrenheit. The idea here is that by using foods in their natural state, they're going to provide more nutrients than what we would get if we happen to cook those foods. Because cooking the foods based off of the tenets of this diet would extract nutrients from it. The other thing is that by eating the ultra-processed foods that we see within the world, and by eating the fast foods that we see within the world, we tend to have an increased risk for developing certain types of diseases. Well, what does the science say about that? Do we have anything to back up these reported claims that raw food diets happen to provide? The problem is that a lot of the evidence that we have about raw food diets is actually going to get extracted from the vegan and the vegetarian diets as opposed to scientific studies as it relates to raw food, which means that we can stipulate that it might provide benefit to metabolic conditions, but we do know that it does lead to a reduction in body mass and body weight, predominantly through starvation of the body more than anything else. So once again, we're going to talk about some of the reported benefits that might come about from eating raw foods. But the thing is that a lot of the reported benefits that we have is simply extrapolations from other dietary practices. We might see a reduction in ROS development. We might see a reduction in neural inflammation, leading to improvement in neuron functions within the nervous system. We do see a change in metabolic flexibility and a change in muscle hormone signals based off of the conversion from a normal omnivoric diet to a raw food diet. Most of the signals that we see here are going to correlate with starvation signals that we might see in individuals. There is definitive benefit that we see in cardiovascular functions for people who follow a raw food diet due to the reduction in cardiovascular inflammation, an improvement in compliance, and an improvement in cardiac functions that is associated with eating of uncooked foods, as well as the reduced exposure to pyrolyzed proteins that come about from the cooking process. In terms of adipose tissue, we see an increase in lipolysis, an increase in the use of fats by the body that correlates with a reduction in nutrient load similar to a starvation that might take place. This also leads to a reduction in the formation of fats within the adipose tissue and a change in hormone signals and activation signals of the immune cells within the adipose tissue and within the body whole. There is no reports that say exactly whether or not a raw food diet has any impact on our actual metabolic hormones and regulation of glucose metabolism through changing of insulin and glucagon signaling coming away from the pancreas. There is a reduction that we see in non-alcoholic fatty acid liver issues within the liver following a raw food diet, very similar to what we see from people who follow a vegan diet, as well as other dietary practices where we reduce the total amount of refined sugars and starches that are being consumed. There's a change in hormonal signals coming away from the liver that is very similar to what we see in terms of hormonal signals coming away from the liver following starvation that alters metabolic rates and metabolic flexibilities throughout the body. So we have a whole bunch of ideas about what the raw food diet might do based off of what other types of diets that are very similar to the raw food diet might offer. But what evidence do we have about what the raw food diet might give us or might not give us that we see in the scientific literature? So we really have to ask the question, does it automatically mean I'm eating healthier food simply because I'm eating raw food diet? And once again, we have to start by looking at what does the vegan and vegetarian diets tell us? Because a lot of the dietary principles in the raw food diet are going to come away from the vegan and the vegetarian diets. But on top of that, we also tend to lose a lot of nutrition by eating raw foods relative to their cooked counterparts. Cooking actually leads to an increase in nutrition availability. It also will lead to a reduction in digestion time, an increase in absorption of nutrients from the foods that we're eating, which means that eating a raw food diet may not be as beneficial to us nutritionally as we might think. And what are some of the issues that might come about by eating raw foods? Well, just like with everything else, we have to worry about deficiencies. Because of what happens in terms of cooking of the foods that we're going to be eating, we could see a deficiency in vitamins that need to be heated in order to increase their bioavailability and reactivity. Because of restriction of certain types of foods, we might see a reduction in niacin, we might see a reduction in vitamin B5, we might see a reduction in biotin, vitamin B7, we might see a reduction in cobalamin, vitamin B12, we might see a reduction in vitamin A, vitamin D, and vitamin K based off of the types of foods that we're eating and whether or not we're heating those foods prior to consuming them. Because of the types of foods that we're eating and the restrictions that we have within the diets, we could see a reduction in calcium, a reduction in iron, a reduction in iodine, a reduction in magnesium, a reduction in potassium, and a reduction in sodium from people who are following a raw food diet. The change in these electrolytes can lead to certain types of issues, including anemia. We could see a reduction in muscle function, a reduction in neuron function. We could possibly see weakening of bones due to a reduction in calcium, along with other factors that calcium is involved with. Because of the types of foods that we're eating, very similar to deficiencies that we might see with vegan and vegetarian diets, we could see a reduction in the omega-3 fatty acids. We could see a disruption in the ratio between omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids. We will see a reduction in the consumption of essential amino acids and complete proteins. We could see a reduction in, and will see a reduction in taurine as well as creatine, given that animal sources, in particular cooked animal sources, increase the availability of those amino acids in terms of both digestion as well as absorption. There is going to be a huge change in the psychological drive for food. Unlike what we see with other foods in terms of good food, bad food, a lot of the times that we're looking at in terms of why the raw food diet is not going to be good for long-term use is the fact that it is excessively restrictive, can lead to starvation issues, and may lead to overconsumption of foods following the termination of a raw food diet. Because of the increased consumption of various types of vegetables within the raw food diet, particularly vegetables that do not get cooked, we could consume an excessive amounts of what is usually referred to as anti-nutrients. Well, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Hopefully you got a little bit out of the brief cover of the raw food diet. Once again, more stuff is coming in the chapter. Please make sure that you are liking what we're putting out there. Please make sure you're subscribed and are sharing out. and click that bell to make sure you get alerts for when we post new things, both here on YouTube as well as in the podcast and on Substack. Please make sure you're following us on all of the various platforms that we're publishing on.